Welcome to Attenuation, a weekly podcast where two friends come together to drink beer, discuss beer styles and trends, and just generally ruminate on the meaning of life, aka beer. If you enjoy your time with us, we invite you to become a weekly listener and subscribe to the podcast. Without further ado, here is this week's episode.
Hello, and welcome to episode 41 of Attenuation, a beer podcast. My name is Jason, and I'm joined by my best friend since 8th grade, Steven.
Hello.
How are you doing today, sir?
Good. That's how I'm going to mix it up. I'm just going to say hello in a really weird way every time.
Okay, yeah, that sounds fun. I paused because I got it in the script, so we're set. You ready to drink some beer?
Totally.
We have a good topic today. We're doing a deep dive into Rubicon Brewing.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of nerd out today, and I apologize for that.
And you've already blown my mind in, we talk a little bit before we start recording, and some of these facts are mind-blowing, so
I've done a couple of weeks, honestly, of research for this one because I've been thinking about doing this episode for a while, so I've just been kind of gathering, and it's a little hard because we're doing a deep dive on a brewery that doesn't exist anymore. Technically, it's a little hard to dig up information and get stuff off the internet because a lot of stuff, they don't even have a website anymore. Yeah,
that's crazy.
So I've had to dig through some really old YouTube videos and stuff, but it's been fun.
Did you try Wayback Machine?
No.
It's you can look at old cached versions of web pages. We'll see if we can find anything.
Try that, yeah.
All right, well, before we get into that topic, we, of course, have to do the most fun part of the podcast, at least for us, and that's drinking beer. So I will introduce my beer, give some nose notes, and then I'll pass it over to Steven to do the same. So today, I'm very excited. Now, we covered them, I think. I don't remember which episode we talked about them, but Rodenbach, which is a very ancient brewery. And I believe we talked about just their normal entry. But this one I found was special. This is their Alexander. So this is aged in oak, but then it's also got my favorite thing in the world, macerated sour cherry juice. So I'm very excited. Yeah, I'm excited about this one. Ooh, it has a very, very nice cherry smell right away. It's a very interesting color. It's deep, deep red. It looks like mahogany bookshelves.
Oh, that was very descriptive. I like that.
Yeah, see, usually I don't use a very descriptive word, but that's exactly what it looks like. And then it has very fine bubbles, pretty active head here, and they are sticking around. Ooh, the smell is very nice. Just sour cherry juice, a little bit of a vinegar smell, some oak. I think this is going to be quite tasty. So I'm going to pass it to you, Steven, to introduce your beer.
All right. So this is day 9 of my 12 days of Christmas beer, or 12 days of beer Christmas, because they're not all Christmas beers. This is Florida Weisse from Untitled Art. It is a 4.5% Berliner Weisse with Guava, Passionfruit, and prickly pear. Brewed and canned in Waunakee, Wisconsin.
That one sounds good.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited about this one. This has been the first sort of not winter beer.
Were they all winter beers?
Yeah, a lot of them were winter warmers. I just had the Anchor Christmas Ale or whatever, their yearly special beer that we talked about.
Yeah, I see you got a St. Arnold Christmas Ale on there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Which is kind of a little disappointing because I just had that. I bought it on my own. I bought a single of it on my own and I got it. There was a Belgian Wit from Martin House that was actually really good. That was the only other sort of not Christmassy beer.
Okay.
Other than that, it's been stouts and winter beers, which makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense for 12 days of Christmas beer selections.
Yeah, so it's pink.
It kind of just looks like juice.
And thick. I'm sorry I said I wasn't going to drink these beers.
I thought you were done with
these. They
put
it in my box.
You had no control.
I didn't. I just picked a box. They were just a stack of boxes, and I get to pick whichever one I get.
You get a pass.
This is not my fault.
You get a pass today.
Wow. The smell is really awesome. It's very, very tropical. Guava and passion fruit are overwhelming the senses here. Almost a little bit of pineapple too, like I'm on a beach drinking a fruity cocktail. Okay, I'm gonna drink some juice.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, this is really good. So I don't know why I failed to mention this. This is a Flanders red ale, so it's just this, that sour style, and it's actually ranked number 3 on Beer Advocate for that style. So another beer to give like a good alternative to this, there's that similar style that actually comes. It looks like it's from the same brewery in Belgium. They also make Duchess, and I don't know how to say it. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the Duchesse de Bourgogne or something.
See, you say it. You say it. You do a way better job than I would do.
I just make it up.
That one's also a Flanders red ale. That one I don't think has like cherry added. So obviously this is going to influence my opinion because I love cherry. So imagine that beer, but with cherry added to it. So like,
because you drank the cherry version of that, right, on the podcast? I think.
I've also had the cherry version of that. So what's shocking about this is I don't remember the exact price, but that Duchess beer is pretty expensive. But this one you can actually get at my Total Wine, the local Total Wine. You can get a 4-pack of this for $16. So they end up being like $4 each. So I think that's almost like half the price of what you'd pay for a Duchess.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, but this is like higher. It not only is it higher ranked, but I really like it because of the cherry. But I don't know. It's like, I really like it. So it's like sweet cherries, and then right in the beginning, and then sour, like lemony, like lemon sour, and pretty sour, like pretty puckeringly sour. And then that kind of like fades away into vanilla, and you get a lot of the oak notes. And then it kind of comes back, like the sour comes back, and then has a really long finish that's kind of like sweet cherries at the end. And it's super carbonated. So like when you take a sip, it's just like cascades. You know, like sometimes when you swallow or sometimes when you're like drinking something and you taste it on different parts of your tongue, that's basically what happens. It feels like you taste it in like the front of your mouth, and then it kind of goes all the way to the back, and then it comes back to the front of your mouth. It's like there's a lot going on. And I think part of that is due to the high carbonation. But I really like this. I'm super stoked that I tried this. I just bought a single, but this is the kind of beer I would like to and I don't think you have to drink it in a certain amount of time, but just have these in the fridge because this beer makes me very happy. Yeah.
Yeah, you've always been a Flanders Red guy, though.
Yes, I've always been a Flanders Red person, and then finding one that they make cherry, that's like pretty affordable. I mean, it's always going to be kind of expensive because all this beer is aged, right? So they have that time factor, but yeah, having the access to a cherry version makes me very happy.
Where does La Folie land on that list?
So I guess it's the distinction, but La Folie is considered Flanders Old Bruin.
Okay.
So it's slightly different classification, and that's number 2 for that style.
So more of a brown then.
Yes, exactly. That's a Flemish brown ale, and this is
brown.
Yeah, okay. So that's considered. It's quite similar, but it's considered a different style.
Gotcha. So I guess that's a 2 thumbs up for you.
Yes, I'm mostly excited about the accessibility and the price.
Nice.
So did you like your beer? Sorry, I'm gushing over here.
No, it's okay. I'll let you have a moment there. Well, mine is juice.
Okay. Yeah.
That's really good. It is certainly the odd beer out of this box of stouts and winter warmers and darker beers. So it's kind of funny that they threw this in. But it's really good. The carbonation, the mouthfeel is very soda-like. It's that very, very active bubbles popping up at the top. It kind of dances on your tongue. And that plays into both the sweetness and the sourness of the beer. So I'm getting a lot of tart lemon sourness. Sweetness, I think, almost like a melon sweetness, which is probably the prickly pear showing up there. So a lot of that's where the sweetness is coming from. The guava and the passion fruit kind of lending more towards the tart flavors. Again, getting sort of a pineapple note there too, which is maybe from the passion fruit, maybe kind of just a combination of that and sort of the lemony Berliner Weisse base. But I mean, it's really good. I don't know. I can't say it's beer technically, but it's very good.
Hey, as long as you enjoy it, that's all that matters.
Yeah. I saw a funny meme. It was like, beer's the brewer's brew and beer's the brewer's drink.
Okay.
Like, beer's the brewer's brew, or like heavily adjuncted, heavily fruited, all the stuff. And then beer's the brewer's drink, like a lager.
Yes. Well, that always reminds me. Lager. That doesn't surprise me at all because I know we talked about this before, but Vinny over at Russian River, I swear they say on the tour his favorite beer they make is their lager.
Yeah, the STS Pills or whatever.
Yeah, their Pilsner, the STS Pills. Yeah, and it's like for a brewery that's doing all this insane stuff, for that to be his favorite beer is kind of like surprising. But then I think that might be kind of common.
Yeah, that was the same with the Fieldwork head brewer.
Yeah,
he said his favorite beer is the Vienna Lager, which is just the amber lager. You know.
Yeah,
it's like
keep it simple, stupid.
And he hates that he has to brew this like coconut IPA where he has to toast all this coconut, but like people love it.
Right. Hey, that's what keeps the lights on. So.
Yep, you gotta brew the beers that keep the lights on.
They also make that watermelon beer. Didn't they say they hate making that one too because they have to basically like juice 1,000 watermelons?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the process is amazing. It really is like artisan craft beer. It's true craft beer, but it sucks if you're the brewer.
It's fun to drink, not so fun to crush all those watermelons.
Yeah, can you imagine how much simpler it is to just make like a amber?
Yes.
Yeah, so beer's the brewers brew and beer's the brewers drink. And today was a beer a brewer brews, but probably doesn't drink.
That's great.
But very good. 2 thumbs up to mine.
Yeah, we're off to a good start. It's always a good episode when we both give thumbs up. Okay, so next up we have our next segment is postscripts, which we make corrections to previous episodes and or beer news, but today I think we have postscripts.
Yeah, well, I think for a few episodes we've been like uneducated and, well, that's like every episode.
We're always uneducated.
Yeah.
Well, I'm embarrassed because we did like a whole thing about Belgian. I don't remember any of it. I got to go back and listen to our own podcast.
Was that the farmhouse ales episode, maybe?
Maybe.
It must have been.
Where we covered all this, but it's just nothing stays in my brain for more than like 2 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, we're on episode 41. There's a lot of episodes now. I can't remember what we talked about in what episode.
Yeah, I'm going to go back and listen to our own podcast to educate myself.
You can skip over like the first 5 episodes. They're pretty bad.
Yeah, don't listen to those. We should just take them off the feed.
But they're important. They're just bad editing. Okay. First off, so we've mentioned this a few times, but we didn't actually have accurate information. So the Beer Advocate rating scale, 95 to 100 is world class.
Oh, you looked this up? I'm so glad you looked this up. Okay, 95 to 100
we can stop making mistakes. 90 to 94 is outstanding.
Okay.
85 to 89 is very good, and 80 to 84 is good. And then lower than that, you just don't drink that stuff.
Is that what it says on the website? Don't drink.
No, it goes all the way down to 60, which is like awful. But
it's funny.
I feel like it wasn't worth mentioning.
No, that's fair.
Okay, and then I wanted to... this is something I wanted to clarify from the last episode, because we did a deep dive on Brooklyn Brewery, and I feel like there were a couple times where I said something about them being like one of the first breweries or like an early brewery or something. And what I meant by that, I didn't clarify, was that like early in the modern craft beer revolution. So you kind of... You have these like multiple eras, even in American craft beer. Yeah, sort of pre-prohibition and post-prohibition, basically. But in terms of modern craft beer, we're talking like mid-'80s, basically. It's the start of that.
Okay.
So
it's one of the first of that generation.
Of that era, yeah.
It's like, aren't they on... I'm going to derail you really quick.
No, you're good.
Isn't there like the waves of coffee? Because I swear I heard about this once. I'm not a coffee connoisseur, so... If you are, you can correct us and send us email. But like Starbucks was like, Starbucks was like second wave or whatever. And then there's third wave, like Temple Coffee. We have Temple Coffee. And that was like, that's even a greater evolution of, because they do, I don't even know what they do because I don't drink coffee, but I know what they have. One of the things they have at Temple at the front is they have this like coffee where it takes the whole day to like drip through this thing. And then you can order. Yes. And you can order that. And that's like Starbucks was a whole revolution. But now if you're like a real coffee connoisseur, you would never drink second wave coffee. You got to drink third wave, which is like Temple. And then I'm sure there'll be fourth wave. So I don't know if there's not really an equivalent to that. But like maybe if the craft beer is around long enough, they'll be like.
Yeah. Is hard seltzers a wave?
Yeah, maybe it's a wave that should be buried in history. But yeah, you're talking about, so like this wave of craft beer, they were one of the first breweries in that wave, but not one of the
Yeah.
first breweries like in the United States.
Yeah. I actually kind of like that idea because I was having this discussion with someone else about beers like, well, we're going to talk about Monkey Knife Fight from Rubicon, but beers like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, Pliny the Elder, Blind Pig, some of the early craft beers in the modern era, at least, which is, I don't know what wave that is, but whatever wave that is, you can drink those beers and you can say to those beers, there's so many more beers now that are equivalent or better, or with like less hype or whatever, but I always call them legacy beers, like they're beers that basically defined the style. So
they're classic movies.
Yeah, they're like the beers that will forever be the like standard bearers.
And if they never existed, none of these like modern interpretations would exist. Because I hear the same. Are you kind of alluding to the fact that some of these beers, like people say they're overrated sometimes and stuff like that?
Yeah,
because they're judging them against modern standards. But like these beers are the only reason there are modern standards. Like it's almost like you have to pay respect because they paved the path to what you're drinking today.
Yeah, so I think recognizing that the waves, like you can't have a second and a third wave without the first wave, basically.
Yes, 100%.
So yeah, I mean, I think the analogy to coffee being like, well, I don't drink Starbucks anymore, I drink this. I mean, I think there's that, certainly there's that feeling in craft beer where people feel like they don't need to drink those beers, or when they do, they're not impressed or something. But you have to have the perspective of, these beers are what they are because you couldn't drink other stuff without these.
Yeah, and you have to have the context of like what you're drinking and when it was first brewed and what the universe looked like at that time for the craft beer world.
Yeah. So.
Okay, sorry, that was right in the middle of your postscript. So.
Oh, that's okay. Oh, and then I was just going to mention, so it was really cool. I've had like all these weird little coincidences, but one of them was that literally the day after we did the Brooklyn Brewery deep dive, I had a Brooklyn beer in my beer box. It was a Brooklyn Winter IPA. It was a Winter Red IPA, actually. It was very good. So that was cool. And then the next day or day after that, so usually I stop at every once in a while I'll stop at the grocery store on my way into work just to grab like a Red Bull or something to wake me up. And so I went into my local H-E-B, which is our awesome grocery store chain here in Texas. And they have the H-E-B right by my work has a pretty good beer selection usually. And so even at like 6:45 in the morning, I'll just stroll by the
nice
pre-work on my way into work at 6:45 in the morning. I'll just stroll by the beer aisle just to see, because they're always getting new stuff and this stuff.
Yeah, you want to know.
Yeah, I want to know what they have. And I'm just kind of perusing this end cap of beer in the refrigerated end cap, and I see Brooklyn Black Ops.
Right. Are you serious? We just talked about this.
I know. So I'm like, dude, this is crazy. And a four pack of Brooklyn Black Ops, like 4 16-ounce cans, was only $14.
Oh, that's amazing.
Which is pretty good for a bourbon barrel-aged stout like that. It's pretty hard to find.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I have to get that. So I grabbed that. So I took it up to the register and tried to ring it up. I was at the self-checkout, and it came up with this big red screen, and it said time restricted item. And the lady comes over. At first I thought she had this. When the screen came up, I thought she needed to see my ID, and then I read it, and the lady comes over. She goes, "You can't buy alcohol before 7 a.m. on a weekday."
Dang, Steven.
It was like 6:47 at this point. I'm like, you can't just round up.
That's brutal.
These like puritanical beer laws.
I know.
They're killing me.
What if you put it back and then you came back later and it was all gone?
I know. That was my fear.
You're like, lady, do you know this is Black Ops from Brooklyn Brewing? It's a rare commodity.
So it was funny because she said something like, oh, I got a manager coming to override. I was like, oh, you can do that? Awesome. But then she was like, I'm like standing there, and she goes, oh, you can just move to the other register and buy your stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, do I wait for the override? She's like, Oh no, she just has to come clear that screen.
They're not letting
She's
you
like,
buy
you
it.
don't get to buy the beer.
But if you waited 13 minutes, they would let you buy it.
Yeah, but then I would have been late to work.
Oh.
I was like, I was contemplating what it was worth being late for. But I decided that I could just come back. It probably would be there. And then I'm at work thinking about it all morning. And I realized like mid-morning that my wife had to run some errands right there in that area. So I just texted her and said, hey, if you don't mind, like, will you just stop in and grab that? It was the last one when she grabbed it. And there were probably 5 or 6 when I...
Wow, it's a good thing you asked her.
Yeah.
See, it is popular. It got scooped up.
I couldn't believe it.
Wow, you are so lucky. You got to drink one of those on the podcast.
Yeah, I will. But... yes. So that was my story about getting Black Hops. I got it. I literally cannot believe that as soon as we talked about it, I saw it. And
you were so lucky. That's the thing too, is like, I'm sure they get like that one shipment or whatever, and then they put it out on the shelf and then it's just gone. And you just happen to walk in like right when they put it out. You're so lucky.
And knowing what it was. Like a week before, I wouldn't have known.
You would have walked right past it.
Yeah. Crazy.
Amazing.
So universe smiled on me that day.
Yeah, it did. White whale secured.
And then Texas state law frowned at me.
Yeah.
Somehow the universe still smiled over
balance. It's in balance. Yeah.
All right, those are my postscripts.
Okay, perfect. So we can go on to our main topic, and that is a deep dive into Rubicon Brewing.
Yes, the greatest brewery you've never heard of.
Oh, that's a good tagline.
So I alluded to this at the beginning of the episode, but I did get very excited as I learned more and more about this brewery, just because the history that exists in this brewery is very, very important to the modern craft beer revolution, this wave of craft beer, because it started around the same time as a lot of the other breweries we've talked about, like Anchor in Brooklyn. What's interesting is that those breweries, most of the breweries we've talked about to this point, like Anchor, Youngling, Sam Adams, Brooklyn, they all had a lager, or I think Anchor's was the steam beer. All pretty basic beers, almost like as a craft version of the macro styles that everybody was drinking. Yes, we know you are drinking these macro styles, these macro lagers. Here's a beer that's just a little better than those. Right?
Yeah, like an incremental step, yeah.
Yeah, and what Rubicon did was they did have a very good Czech Pilsner on tap at all times, and they had an amber. They had some pretty easy styles to drink, but they were also making a beer called IPA, and they made the Rubicon IPA, which was, I don't know, from everything I can tell, was basically the first popular West Coast IPA, basically established that style.
Okay, wow.
So you had Sierra Nevada, who had already created the American Pale Ale style, and so that was, I have to say, I think Sierra Nevada was the first to really start pushing people towards hoppy beers with that.
Yeah.
But Rubicon were the ones that took it to that next level and made really hoppy, bitter West Coast style IPAs, and were very, very successful at it. So that beer, the Rubicon IPA, it won gold at the Great American Beer Festival the first 2 years it entered, so 87 and 88, and that like essentially put it on the map.
Okay.
This was a West Coast style IPA. It's a very malty IPA brewed with Cascade and Chinook hops, dry hopped as well with those hops. It was about 6.5%, and this was a beer that influenced a ton of brewers that drank this beer, including Vinny from Russian River.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he drank Rubicon IPA for the first time in like 1991, I think he said.
Okay.
And that inspired him to make Blind Pig IPA.
Oh, that's so cool.
Which was the beer that led to Pliny the Elder, Pliny the Younger, all the beers we know. But that was...
Okay, this is the most important brewery we've ever heard
of. So I guess I should start out. They are in Sacramento, California. They were in Midtown Sacramento. They eventually opened up a tap room in West Sacramento, and a bottling facility as well in West Sacramento. This was in 1987.
Wow.
They started. They were owned by Ed and Susie Brown. That's who started it. Shortly thereafter, though, they sold it to a guy named Glenn Phillips, who I mean, if you talk to people who were going to Rubicon for 25 years, Glenn Phillips was the guy that he was more associated with than Ed and Susie Brown, just because they sold it off so quickly. And Glenn Phillips, he's an interesting guy. He'd been home brewing since, I think something said he had been home brewing since he was 15, which is like amazing. You're like, oh, you've been doing it for a long time. Like, oh, you've been doing it for a long time. He had been sort of in and around brewing and breweries. He'd been a general manager at a brewery. He had homebrewed for a long time. He'd been in the brewing world. He was not he never was the head brewer. He just he always wanted to buy Rubicon. He offered to buy Rubicon from Ed Brown, and he wasn't ready to sell at the time. Okay. And then when he reached out to Glenn first and said, "Hey, I'm going to sell. You want to buy it?" And he did.
Ooh, nice. You gave him first right of refusal.
Yeah, pretty cool, right? So they brought in a guy named Phil Muller. He was the head brewer at first. He was the creator of, I guess, really the creator of the West Coast IPA style was Phil Muller. So he created the Rubicon IPA. And then they had this Irish Dry Stout, an Amber, the Czech Pilsner, and an American Pale Ale called Monkey Knife Fight.
Ah.
That was their 5 standard brews.
Okay.
At all times. What's really cool is the Czech Pilsner was a pretty rare thing to have on a brewery tap list at the time because they took a lot of time. So they needed time and space, and a lot of smaller breweries just didn't have that or didn't want to devote the space to lagering a beer. But they did, and they did really well. And what was really funny is that lager yeast are very, very sensitive, and they cannot be inactive for too long. It becomes more and more difficult. The longer they're inactive, it becomes more difficult to get them active again. And lots of times when you try to do that, and they've been sitting too long, they will just kind of stick their middle finger up at you and say, "We don't want to."
They're very temperamental.
Exactly. So if you're not continually brewing it and keeping your yeast active, it's hard to maintain a lager yeast. And they weren't brewing it enough to maintain a good culture. So Sudwork in Davis, which we've talked about occasionally, they're always brewing lagers. That was their main brew. So they would just, when they were ready to brew this Czech Pilsner, they would just go get a culture of yeast from Sudwork, and they would go brew their beer with that. And then Sudwork started getting into ale brewing a little bit, and of course they didn't maintain too many of their ale yeasts. They're a little bit easier to maintain if you want, but they did it so infrequently as well that they just created this partnership, and they would go get ale yeast from Rubicon.
Oh, that's amazing. So they had a yeast exchange program.
Yeah, pretty cool. So the Monkey Knife Fight was a really interesting beer. That's American Pale Ale, so they're piggybacking off the success of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale that basically created the style. Rubicon IPA was successful, but the problem is not everybody was ready for that hoppy of a beer.
Okay.
So you had to give them a little bit of another option, an option of like a hoppy beer, but not, scaled back.
Right.
So their whole point was to make a beer that was a little bit more approachable, lower alcohol, less hops. So they took the dry hopping step out. They used initially Mount Hood hops, scaled back the grain bill a little bit. So the alcohol went from 6.5 in the Rubicon IPA to 5.4 in Monkey Knife Fight. So just scale back the alcohol a little bit, the hopping a little bit. And honestly, it was supposed to be the brewer at the time, Scott Cramlett, who came in as the head brewer after Phil Muller. He said it was only ever supposed to be a one batch beer.
Really?
Yeah. And by 2009, they were on their 150th batch of it.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. Imagine brewing a beer 150 times.
It's a lot of beer.
You think about other beers and how many times they've been brewed.
And I want that's a
chocolate
fascinating like stat. I want to know that for like a ton of other beers now.
Yeah, like what batch number is this? One beer.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I listened to an interview with Scott Cramlett, the head brewer at the time in like 2000s. He was asked, like, do these beers ever change? And he said that they have to, because different grains become unavailable, different hops become unavailable, different seasons of different hops provide different flavor profiles. So they're constantly tweaking the recipe, but trying to achieve the same, like as close to the same beer as possible. Which
right, keep it consistent.
Yeah, which is also fascinating to me as someone who has tried to brew a few times, to think that you could like change the recipe, but in an effort to create the same beer you already created with a different recipe. It's mind-blowing that that's even achieved.
You got to be a master.
Yeah.
That's the they do the same thing in like the Scotch universe. Because
Really?
they'll have like they have the master taster or whatever, or the master mixer, because they have all these casks. And, well, they have to have like a minimum. So if you want to put 12-year-old on the label, that means everything has to be at a minimum 12 years old. But you might put stuff that's older than that in there. Okay. So every year you basically have to mix up from all these casks you have a number of bottles to meet production. But you might stuff is running out, right? So then you're like, oh, these casks are gone. Now we want it to taste similar, or if not exactly the same, but we got to use like a new combination. So yeah, it's a similar thing. The component ingredients are evolving and changing over time, but you're still trying to make a similar product. That's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, because the way they talked, they'd be like, yeah, we want somebody to be able to taste our beer, and then like taste the beer again the next year or a couple of years later and think like, oh yeah, this is the Rubicon beer. You know, like, I mean, I guess I can't even imagine. I can't imagine getting so familiar with one brewery's beers that if you drank the beer, you'd be like, oh yeah, this is a Rubicon beer.
That's fair, but it's like,
but like in their head, like in their mind, that's what they want to create. They want to create beers that taste like Rubicon beers. But I mean, I don't know, like the casual drinker, I don't think would be able to tell, but they want to be able to tell.
That's pretty awesome. It's a very high like milestone to set, to have like a such a consistent product and maybe such a consistent lineup that you have your style is like apparent in everything that you make. I like it.
Yeah, so pretty cool. So that's Monkey Knife Fight. Became one of their most popular beers. They literally couldn't keep up with
the demand.
I mean, they were continually brewing it.
Yeah.
And I want to say the turnaround time was like between brews. So you were getting a batch of this beer to completion, ready to drink, like every 12 days.
Okay.
And they couldn't keep up.
That's crazy.
Like they're selling enough at the brew pub constantly
that it's running out.
They're running out, like just before they can get another one. It's pretty awesome.
That is really awesome. Very popular.
Very, very successful.
Yeah.
The timeline's going to be kind of crazy because my notes are all over the place on this, but they ended up closing in 2017, just a few weeks shy of being 30 years old.
Oh, that's a heartbreaker.
Yeah. In fact, Glenn Phillips couldn't even do an interview. There were lots of news stories and reporters over those last few days. They announced it on Facebook that they were closing, that they were going to sell their food for a couple more days because it was a restaurant as well.
Yeah. Okay.
They were going to sell the food for a couple more days, and then they were going to sell their beer for like a month until it ran out. And so there were a lot of reporters and doing news stories on their closure, and Glenn Phillips couldn't even do an interview. And his response was like too emotional to do an interview.
Oh my gosh, that's so sad.
Yeah, it was a big deal. A lot of people had been going there for all 30 years.
Yeah.
There was this group of they called the Rubikids.
Okay.
And they were basically kids that were drinking beer there that had grown up like with their parents taking them.
Oh, that's so awesome. Like to dinner there, but yeah.
So, and they were like, a lot of them were tearful about the closing, and I remember hearing about it just because I drank Monkey Knife Fight. Mm-hmm. That was one of my early beers too that I liked.
Yeah.
So that was kind of where I was in my craft beer journey, is just sort of starting to find good beers. And I just remember hearing that they were closing, being like, oh man, I really like that beer. Not having any context of how important this beer was to not only the Sacramento community, but to the craft beer revolution. But one of the reasons that they stated for the closure was that when they first opened, there were like 5 breweries in the state.
Oh, geez.
Or 6, maybe, I don't know, or something. And then there was just that, there's only one in Sacramento, and then, maybe a few years after that, there was maybe 5 or 6 in Sacramento, and then by the time that they closed, there were 85 in Sacramento.
I was gonna say there's probably 5 on their block.
Yeah. In fact, so there is a brewery now in its place called Alaro, and I had never heard of them, and I was walking to Fieldwork. I had parked, and then I was walking to Fieldwork Brewing and walked right past it, and I was like, oh, there's another brewery. Not knowing, I had no idea that used to be where Rubicon was. So yeah, and so there was the competition that
that's heavy competition
that put them out of business. They just couldn't keep up, which still like kind of blows my mind. I mean, I understand that there's a lot of competition and people are pulled in different directions, but they had a pretty good cult following.
Yeah, and actually that does surprise me that the regulars couldn't like keep the business going. But
something else I read said that they had stretched themselves a little too thin trying to capture a little bit of that market back.
I see.
They had opened that West Sac tap room. They had opened a bigger sort of bottling and brewing facility in West Sac, and I think maybe they just tried to get a little bit too big.
Yeah. Trying
to keep up, and then it like made it even worse when they couldn't,
Right. That makes sense.
When they weren't able to get some of that market share back. So, but a very sad story. Okay, so here's some other cool stuff about the beers they brew.
Okay.
In the early 90s, they brewed a beer that they called a wheat wine.
Okay.
So you've heard of barley wine.
Yes.
Talked about that on the podcast a little bit. So barley wines are barley based. Mm-hmm. And a wheat wine is just basically a barley wine, but
wheat based
beer? More than 50% of the grain bill is wheat.
Okay. But like super strong probably.
Super strong. Yeah. Usually around 11-12%. Very hoppy. Almost like a wheat triple IPA, basically.
That sounds wild.
Yeah. So this wheat wine was awesome. Like everybody loved it. It had basically been, the style had been created by this guy who was trying to make a wheat beer for his friends. His name was Jim Pell, and he just used way too much grain, and he made a really, really strong beer.
A little oopsie, yeah.
And he was like, And so I don't know whether like one of these guys had tasted that or something and decided to actually make it. So it won gold at the Great American Beer Festival in the other strong beers category.
I was going to say, what category did we throw it in?
Yeah, there wasn't a wheat wine category. And then it won gold at the World Beer Cup. They actually had a wheat wine category.
Okay.
So they won gold, but there were like 5 entries or something. Like it was very, very minimal entries into this category because it was such a small category. But I think they created a wheat wine category at the beer festival, at the Great American Beer Festival, and then they've taken it away now and sort of put it back under the other strong beers. But anyway, they did well in that category.
What was that wheat wine called?
I don't know. Oh, we'll have to postscript that one.
Postscript it in.
Because it has a name, but I forgot. There was this other barley wine festival called the Toronado Barley Wine Festival. I think it was in San Francisco. It's just all barley wines. And it was a competition. And they entered their wheat wine into the competition. And then they were like, when the results came out, they're like, oh, how did we do? How did we do? And the judges said, oh, you were disqualified. Because this is a barley wine festival and you entered a wheat wine. So then the following year, they entered the wheat wine, but they called it a barley wine.
Are you serious? They just renamed it?
Just named it.
Did it work?
Yeah, and got judged.
They tricked them.
Because what they're saying is that like the flavor is a little bit like, I don't know, they called it a little bit more round, a little more smooth. But to most drinkers, they would just think, oh, this is a barley wine. Like no one no one's gonna drink it and immediately be able to say, "Oh, this is a wheat wine." But since they entered it in the category as a wheat wine, it got disqualified.
That is too funny. So I looked up wheat wine.
Okay.
There are 304 ranked wheat wines on Beer Advocate. And the number one wheat wine is called White Chocolate from the Brewery.
Okay.
I think that does hit my white whale list.
Yeah, for sure.
13.8% ABV.
Yeah, they also brewed this one called Blonde Bombshell, which was actually a barley wine. That's another beer. It was 11.2%. That was another early style because basically it was barley wine was a triple IPA. Like, those styles are essentially the same.
Okay, yeah.
Which is a very strong hopped beer, heavily hopped. So it's kind of interesting to see that those styles have somewhat diverged a little bit. And again, it'd be really interesting. I really need to start drinking barley wines. So I do think I would like that style because I'm very much a...
I laugh only because I've had many barley wines.
That's a style. I am actually gonna get into that. I'm gonna drink what's the Sierra Nevada one?
Okay, so the Sierra Nevada one is Bigfoot.
Yes.
I don't think that's your move. I do not like that one. I think the gateway barley wine is from Anchor Brewing.
Okay.
It's called Old Foghorn. That's where I would start.
And it's only like 9%, I think.
Yeah, maybe that is why it's more approachable. I don't remember. I'll look up the ABV, but Bigfoot is powerful. I think they're all powerful. But yeah, Old Foghorn is 10%.
Okay, that's more than I thought.
Oh, Bigfoot's only 9.6.
Look at that. You didn't like it.
I don't like Bigfoot. I know it's very popular. I don't like it. I like Old Foghorn. But try both. You should do, what you should do, one of the future episodes. You got to do a Bigfoot and a Old Foghorn side by side.
I'm just going to do like a barley wine tasting. Whatever ones I can find.
Yeah, the problem is they are, like, I know Sierra Nevada labels their Bigfoots by year. So, like, they'll be the 2021. And I highly recommend aging them. They do get a lot better if you age them because they mellow out a little bit. But yeah, so I don't know if they just make it once a year. But yeah, if you do see them, pick one up. And yeah, try some barley wines. I would love to see your reaction. I want your live reaction to barley wines.
Yeah, I'm game. I love a triple IPA, so.
I can't wait for this episode.
All right. Well, we'll continue on with some facts. Trying to think where to go from here. Well, so I mentioned the interview with Vinny, or maybe not. Vinny from Russian River. He and his wife attended the 25th anniversary of Rubicon. So it would have been like 2012. And he did a little interview, and they were talking about just sort of remembering his first time at Rubicon and first time visiting. And he remembers drinking Rubicon IPA and loving it, thinking it was the best beer he'd ever had, and it inspired Blind Pig IPA.
Right, yes.
Which is another reason why Rubicon is so awesome. Like, Rubicon IPA is the father of so many amazing beers. And then another funny thing from that interview, a story came out because they were talking about the yeast that they used to make that beer, and then he said, they used to just take the yeast out of the bottom of Sierra Nevada pale ale bottles.
Wait, really?
And then up culture, get enough of it and then like just grow a culture from those yeast, which is brilliant.
That's so brilliant. They're collecting the sediment at the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. Why not?
It's free yeast, and it's good.
Yeah. I thought that was such a cool story. I love the trading of yeast and the borrowing of yeast and the stealing of yeast. Yeah,
that's some next level. Like, it's so obvious to just think about doing that, but you're literally it's like stealing someone's technology.
So awesome. And it was cool too because Vinny was attending some sort of brew class at UC Davis when he went to Rubicon. So cool. Yeah. And then Rubicon used to host the UC Davis students. They could come in and watch a brew day or whatever.
Oh, that's great.
That's pretty cool. They actually, Bear Republic's Racer 5 IPA? Mm-hmm. They brewed the first batches of Racer 5 IPA at Rubicon.
That's really cool.
just a contract brewing, but that's where Racer 5 got its start. The head brewer at the time of closing was Chris Keaton. After Rubicon closed, a lot of people wondered what was going to be done with that space, whether it was going to be turned back into another brewery, since it was basically set up for that. But, you're looking at 30 years old. So there was a lot of renovation and retooling that needed to be done, but somebody undertook it, and they opened Alaro Brewing in that same location. And Chris Keaton, who had been the last head brewer at Rubicon, was the first head brewer at Alaro.
Oh, cool.
So it's kind of cool. It was a nice little transition. Part of their mission at Alaro was to continue the legacy of Rubicon.
Mm-hmm.
They knew how important it was to the community, and to create, to not destroy that history. So it's kind of cool that they had that carryover of head brewers.
Yeah.
And then maybe that was a goal of theirs too, to bring him back.
Yeah, carry on at least part of the tradition. Yeah, that's really cool.
But what's interesting is that all the recipes for for Rubicon's beers were sold to Tower Brewing in Sacramento. So Tower Brewing held the actual recipes for Rubicon IPA, Monkey Knife Fight, and all those beers. Obviously, Chris Keaton knew how to brew those beers.
Yeah.
So he brewed an American Pale Ale called Bennett Pale Ale, and he said he very much modeled it. He had Monkey Knife Fight in mind when he brewed it. But
okay. Yeah. It's a variant of it, yeah.
Yeah, so now Tower Brewing, at some point, they decided to actually brew Monkey Knife Fight. They had the recipe. They decided to brew it, and it's one of their most popular beers.
That is so funny.
It's why would,
Don't mess with success. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody loves that beer. It's kind of funny. And, of course, people who had drank it for so long at Rubicon, they were nostalgic for it, basically.
Yeah, that's really cool. At least it's still being made. That's nice.
Yeah, so Rubicon Brewing lives on in both Tower and Alaro. It lives on in the Sacramento community, basically. And it lives on in all the beers that
it inspired.
Exactly.
Very cool. I had no idea.
A lot of fun stuff.
And it was right around the corner.
I know, right? And Alaro won gold at the beer festival with their Castillo IPA. I think it was in the English IPA category. Mm-hmm. They were the youngest brewery ever to win gold in any category at the Great American Beer Festival. They were only 3 months old at the time.
Well, it was a brand new brewery with a very skilled, seasoned brewmaster. So, yeah.
Yeah, with a head brewer that came from a very, very, very old and good brewery. So.
Yeah, they had a little bit of a head start.
Yeah, a lot of cool stuff happened at Rubicon Brewing. A lot of history.
That's awesome. That is a ton of history, and I didn't realize just how much influence it had on some of the other breweries that we love and enjoy today. Oh, sad that it's gone though, because we can't even go. I guess we can go to Alaro, but
I'll tell you the funny story I told you in the pre-roll, but I just thought it was hilarious because I was listening to all these old YouTube videos and all these old podcasts, before podcast was even really a thing. I don't even know what this was. It was some recording.
Recording, yeah.
Yeah, and it was from 2009, I want to say, and this food blogger was visiting Sacramento, and somebody had told him, you should go to Rubicon Brewing. It's okay. So he was going to do this interview with the head brewer and Glenn Phillips. But he wanted to visit Sacramento, just kind of tour Sacramento a little bit. So he was driving around Sacramento, and he said on the recording, he's like, yeah, I went around Sacramento, and luckily I had my GPS. It saved me. He's like, if you don't have a GPS, you need to get a GPS in your car. And I was just laughing so hard because I remember I had that stupid standalone GPS in my car for a while.
Wow, that really dates it.
What's sad is that's 2009. It doesn't even seem that long ago. But
the iPhone came out in 2007, I think. That's crazy too.
Dang, yeah.
That's only 14 years ago. But it seems like we've had smartphones forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had one of those. You'd use a suction cup and stick it to your window, and you'd have to painstakingly plug in the address, and then it would tell you which way to go.
Yeah, my favorite part about the GPS was it had the time, like arrival time, like projected arrival time. I thought that was so cool.
Like, how does it know?
And then the whole time I would try to beat the projected arrival time.
Isn't it dynamically updating?
Yes.
So you can't beat it, Steven. It's accounting for your efforts.
But I knew what it said at the beginning.
Oh, okay. And you'd be like, I'll beat that.
Yeah.
There you go. Fair enough.
Hey, I do remember when I used to have to get on the internet before I would leave the house and print my MapQuest directions.
Those were the good old days.
Those were the good old days.
And by good old days, I mean not... Actually, I'm nostalgic for the past in many ways, but that is not one of the ways I'm nostalgic for the past. Because you took one wrong turn, and then your instructions became useless. Those had to be followed exactly to the letter.
You know, the other thing I hated, it was like, you can do away with like the first 5 things. Like, I know how to get out of my neighborhood.
Yeah, I know how to get to the freeway. You know what the move was back then, though? Here's a life hack that you no longer need.
What's that?
When you're following printed MapQuest instructions, it would put the distance in miles of each step.
Okay.
And you would just reset your trip odometer. So when you got on the freeway and it said like go 17 miles to the exit, you just flip your trip odometer, and when you get to 16 and a half, keep your eyes peeled because you're close, and just do that on each step, and you would never miss it.
Oh man, all the stuff we had to do.
There you go. Good tip that you'll never have to use.
Nice. I like it.
And people are probably like, wait, what's a trip odometer? Yeah.
That's great.
All right, sir. Well, did we cover Rubicon Brewing?
I think so. I know that was kind of a weird order and timeline, and lots of little facts there, but I just love that the history is so awesome.
Yeah, you did a great job, because I did almost no homework for this one. So I was learning along with the audience. So, all right, very good. Well, that was episode 41 of Attenuation, a beer podcast. Oh, hold on. I'm not following the script. If you want to contact us, you should email us.
Oh my gosh, I almost missed the whole...
attenuation@gmail.com, and we're on Instagram at attenuation.podcast. And you should follow us because we're nearing a respectable number of followers. It's exciting.
Yeah, if you don't already follow us, get on there.
Yeah, exciting milestone is.
I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling.
These are orders from Steven. Okay, now I can say my part. That was episode 41 of Attenuation, a beer podcast. My name is Jason, and I'm joined by my best friend since 8th grade, Steven.
That's me.
And we are saying happy holidays.
Yes, Merry Christmas, buddy.
Yeah, you too. Enjoy the time with the family, and we will see you one more time before the new year.
Yeah, so exciting.
Very nice.
2022. Sure, it's going to bring so much joy.
My wife wrote on the calendar on the very last day of we have the little calendar in the hallway that we, put everyone has that, you put your plans.
Yeah.
She put on 12/31/2001. It said, "Is 2020 the good year?" ?
I know. Is we ever going to get one that's better than the one?
Yeah. So we have high hopes for 2022.
Hey, 2021 is the year of Attenuation podcast, the founding year.
That's true. Founding year.
2022, we're in our second year.
There you go. So at least one good thing happened.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, farewell, and we'll see you next week for episode 42.
All right. Cheers, buddy.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Attenuation, a beer podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Instagram or Facebook for more fun content. Catch you next week. Cheers!